Hey folks, Mark here. I want to do another conflict rules of engagement, this time with strangers. Now, since most violence occurs between people who know each other, the idea of rules of engagement with people that you're in a relationship, and that by that I mean work, friendship, whatever, who you have regular dealings with, is a really important starting point. And believe it or not, it's a lot easier to have rules of engagement with other people. Now, the difference about this is in a relationship, you expect them both, both parties to have the same rules. With strangers, it's less about what you're expecting the other person to do than it's more about what you do. And that's a very important thing. I always like to talk about Peyton's four rules, or 5+1. And do not insult him, do not threaten him, do not challenge him, do not don't deny that it's happening, and good Lord, number 5 is give him a face-saving exit. That's the one that's not a don't, you know. I also add another one, which is do not imperiously command the person. And that one is really important because a lot of times people think, I'm not insulting him, I'm not challenging him, I'm not threatening him, but, you are giving him orders. And do you really have the right or the responsibility to give somebody orders out on the street? Now, that's an important thing because there are places where you do have the right to give orders, like get off my land. Okay, that is, things are lined up legally that you as a property owner or the keeper of the property can say this. You can also tell somebody reasonably to stop closing the distance with you and to stay outside of attack range. These are defensible statements that you can make. But if somebody's on the street and you're yelling at them as they're driving down turn that damn music down, you don't have the right to do that. Now, a lot of times what you're going to run into with these things, and this is why having rules of engagement are so important, is you can say things thinking that you have the right to say it and overdo it. Okay? So, like walking up and telling somebody, to stop smoking out in a public place, right? Doesn't matter if you put the word please. Would you please stop smoking? No, you don't have that. So having, one of the rules of engagement is make sure that you have the right or that it is appropriate for you to give orders. Now, like if you're an employee of a business and you're walking up and, telling a troublesome person to leave, that's within the parameters usually. Or if you're a business owner, let's put it that way. Rules of engagements dealing with strangers starts with knowing what you can and cannot do reasonably and appropriate to the circumstances. And that's going to help keep you in line from crossing, or inside the boundaries, keep you from crossing lines. The next thing, again, it comes back to what are the standards? Don't insult them, right? That's a big one using Peyton's 5+1. Don't call them names. Don't use vulgarity. Don't, now, we often default to this kind of behavior thinking that it makes us look more credible. So, some people think the statement of stay back doesn't have enough oomph. So what their reaction is, what they want to do is they want to add to it. So it then becomes like, instead of a growled stay back, it turns into Get back, motherfucker! Because, man, isn't that far more impressive? No, it's not, actually. And while that approach might serve to scare the guy away, which is basically why we tend to default to that behavior. It's to actually, really important thing here. We act that way not because we are intending on violence, but we're actually seeking to avoid it. So if we can make a big enough boogada act, then we think the guy's gonna, back off and we won't have to use violence. Flip a coin on that one. Sometimes it works. A lot of times, and for various reasons, it doesn't. So your rules of engagement, and like I said, Peyton's 5+1 are pretty good. That covers a lot of the things that people make these mistakes. That if my goal is to avoid conflict, much less violence, there are all kinds of behaviors that I can't do, right? And I know that I can't do it, not because it's an infringement on my right or I'm being oppressed or whatever nonsense, right? It's knowing that these behaviors tend to bring a negative reaction, okay? And that's the main reason you have to have your own set of rules of engagement. That there's a good chance this can be escalated if you don't do right. I love the guy, and I can't remember his name, but he summed it up as the word motherfucker has no part in the process of de-escalation. That pretty, yeah, okay, good idea. So, the other thing is also know when it's the flip side of knowing when you do have authority, and that is knowing when you don't. Okay, again, me telling somebody to do something on the street, no. Do you see a badge here? Right? Do you see a law enforcement uniform? No. That's one of those things. I'm not a traffic cop. I can comment on other people's driving, but, I usually do that alone and inside the car. But I don't get to set the rules in public or what I refer to as shared space. I especially don't get to tell somebody what to do in their space. Okay? I cannot walk onto another person's property and demand that they do this. It's just forget it. So, if you walk into a situation and you have a set of rules that you will adhere to, no matter what, right? Like if I walk over to my neighbor and say, hey, could you turn down the music? Now, there's a lot of stuff that I should probably do another video on, but if the guy tells me to go do an unnatural act with myself, I don't have the right to demand any beyond that. And knowing that tells me my viable options. So if I'm willing to negotiate and talk, that's fine. That's great. That's really good empowerment and good on you that you're willing to do it. But you got to know when to stop. And that's part of the rules of engagement. Now, Steve, a Patreon subscriber, commented about how good it is to be polite and courteous. That in, conflict situation. And he really hit on something that I want to close with, is if you have these standards, if you have these set rules of engagement that you will not do under these circumstances, and God knows over here is a different set of circumstances. For example, I will not slug somebody, I will not shoot somebody, I will not, do a tango on the guy's face in these situations, in these circumstances when we're talking. But if he doesn't want to talk, Okay, well, fine. Those are rules of engagement, but that's not, that's higher levels of rules. But that's not what I wanted to talk about in closing. Squirrel. Is when you are focused on, your rules of engagement and meeting those standards, you're actually operating in a different part of your brain. A lot of people get very emotional, and when they get emotional, they're imbalanced, they're out of control, yada 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 yada, and that's all they can see. But if you can remember your rules of engagement, that keeps you, as I said, in a different part of your brain, that you can maintain self control and not make the mistakes that will add to the creation and escalation of the situation towards violence or extend the conflict. So you have way more options if you can stay in that part of your brain and operate within those parameters. So there's a lot of good reasons to have rules of engagement, and have them, know why you have them, and stay within those boundaries.